Good evening, my friends. Tonight, we're traveling back to an ordinary town in the Middle Ages. Imagine this: no alarm clocks, no street lights, not even a sip of hot water at night, without going through extra trouble to reheat it. And you are the most ordinary baker in this town, spending every day surrounded by ovens and dough. So before you get ready to relax, please give a like and hit subscribe Fuji only if you truly enjoy my content, of course. Your support means far more than you can imagine. Before we begin, I'd love to see you leave a comment with the city you're in and the time right now. Now, dim the lights, and let's step into tonight's story together, accompanied by the church bells. You're awake. Actually, that's not quite accurate. You weren't roused from a deep sleep. It's more like you floated up from a short, light state of dormancy. Your body knows the time instinctively, a biological clock more precise than any rooster's crow or church bell. It's rooted in your bones and muscles. It's midnight now, or what was called the wolf hour soon, the time between midnight and dawn, when all is silent, and only the deepest darkness and sharpest cold rule the world. You open your eyes, and all you see is pure, unadulterated blackness, nice so thick. It feels like it has a texture and weight, pressing down on your eyelids. You're lying on a simple trough bed, filled with hay underneath, which makes a dry, crumbly rustling sound every time you move, even slightly. The air is filled with a complex mix of scents: the sweet aroma of hay, the stale smell of wood, the faint smoke from the long extinguished embers in the distant fireplace, and a smell that lingers forever on your fingertips, in your hair, even in your dreams. Foity, the slightly sour scent of flour and yeast. You don't light a candle. You don't even have one. For an ordinary craftsman like you, beeswax candles are a luxury only, lit all night in churches and noble castles. As for the cheap tallow candles made from animal fat, they smell terrible and produce thick smoke. You'd rather fumble your way around your home sifting the back room of your bakery thief in the dark. You could walk around it with your eyes closed. You sit up slowly from the bed, trying not to make too much noise, afraid of waking your wife and children sleeping soundly in the small bed beside you. Their breathing is the only warm, living rhythm in this silence. You step barefoot onto the cold stone floor, and a chill shoots up from the soles of your feet that wakes you up completely. You fumble for a thick woolen coat, coarse in texture and smelling of sheep, but warm enough to keep the cold at bay. Your fingers find the door bolt accurately in the dark, sliding it open gently and skillfully. The door hinge lets out a low groan, like an old man disturbed from his sleep. You walk into the bakery's workshop, even colder than the bedroom without a fireplace. Surely that huge, dormant brick oven, coiled like a resting beast in the corner of the room. The moonlight is cold as water, slanting through a small window without glass, casting a silver patch on the floor. Dust motes float slowly in the beam of light, like a group of lost spirits. Your first task 7, and the most important one every night too, begins now. You walk to a wooden barrel leaning against the wall, covered with a damp linen cloth. You lift the cloth, and a rich, complex, sour smell surges out immediately, fruity, a mix of fruit, wine, and a hint of sharp vinegar. This is your treasure, your business partner, your family heirloom soon, your sourdough starter, what we call natural yeast today. You can't even say how long this starter, or this colony of yeast, has been living in this bakery. You inherited it from your master, who inherited it from his master before him. Some bakers' families have starters said to be passed down for over 100 years. This is more than just a ball of dough. It's a living, temperamental creature. It needs to be fed every day, kept at the right temperature, cared for, and attended to. If it sickens, soon becoming too sour, or losing its vitality, your entire day's business will be ruined. With a wooden spoon, you carefully scoop out a portion of the sleeping starter, thick and sticky, like a grayish-white, breathing slime. You put it into a warm earthen bowl. Then scoop some fresh whole wheat flour from another bag, and a spoonful of not too cold water from the water vat, pouring it slowly into the bowl. You start stirring fruity, or rather, awakening sooty with your hands. Your fingers feel the braininess of the flour, the coldness of the water, the way the sleeping yeast gradually softens and smooths under your touch. This process is full of ritual. You can't rush, can't be rough. You're like a priest performing an ancient sacred ceremony, fudding awakening a sleeping soul, one that can turn lifeless flour and water into fluffy, delicious bread that feeds the entire community. This is the secret of medieval bread. Before artificial yeast was isolated and mass-produced, all leavened bread relied on natural yeast like this. Every baker had their own unique strain of yeast, giving their bread a distinct flavor. Your neighbor, the baker on the other corner of the street, makes bread that tastes completely different from yours. The mystery lies in this bowl of sticky dough. You stir gently until the flour, water, and starter are fully blended into a new, lively batter. You cover the earthen bowl with linen cloth and place it on a shelf, not too far from the oven, but not too close to be too hot. It's a delicate balance. Too cold, and the yeast won't wake up. Too hot, and they'll be killed. You can only rely on your experience, on the way your skin feels the air temperature, to judge. Having done all this, you straighten up and let out a long sigh. The most crucial step is done. Now you wait for the batter to wake up slowly, to start breathing, bubbling, to regain its full vitality. And while you wait, you have something more important, more tiring to do. You turn to that huge beast, coiled in the dark thin your oven, cold and lifeless now, but soon to become the beating heart of the entire bakery. You walk toward it, its large black opening, like the silent mouth of a beast. This is a domed brick oven, simple in structure, but extremely efficient. Its design barely changed for centuries, passed down from Roman times, the Effa's most valuable asset. In some towns, Bakers didn't even have their own ovens. They had to rent public ovens from lords or monasteries, paying a hefty fee, sometimes even with loaves of baked bread. You're lucky. Your master left you this oven, along with the shop. It's a symbol of your freedom and independence. Now you need to get these cold bricks to a steady, blazing temperature high enough to bake bread before dawn. This isn't as simple as twisting a knob like we do today. It's a long process that requires skill and patience. First, you need to clean it. You pick up a long-handled iron scraper and reach deep into the oven, scraping out all the ash and charcoal residue from yesterday's baking. Every scrape, as the iron rubs against the brick, lets out a harsh, shrill sound that echoes loudly in the silent midnight. Ash rises up, like a grey snowfall in the moonlight. You have to hold your breath and squint your eyes. You won't throw this ash away, Funty. It's a precious resource. Your wife will use it to make lye, for washing clothes, or making soap. In that era, nothing was wasted. Once cleaned, you start preparing the fuel. You walk to the backyard, where piles of firewood you bought from the countryside a week ago are stacked. This firewood must be dry hardwood suet oak, or beech, for example. Wet wood produces a lot of smoke, which not only blackens the bread but also gives it an unpleasant taste. Soft wood, like pine, burns too quickly to provide long-lasting, steady heat. Choosing and storing firewood is an art in itself. You pick up a large bundle of firewood, it's a weight making your arms ache, and carry it to the oven, starting to build a carefully designed woodpile. First, you arrange some small kindling and hay in a tent-like structure in the center of the oven. Then stack the thick logs layer by layer on top, making sure air can circulate. This structure is crucial. Fully determines how efficiently and evenly the fire burns. Now, it's time to light it. You take out a flint and a small iron strip, finally a steel striker, kneeling on the cold stone floor. You hold the flint in one hand and strike it firmly with the steel in the other. A crisp clink rings out, and a tiny spark leaps up, landing on a small handful of tinder grass you prepared earlier. Tinder grass is a flammable plant fiber you collected from the wild. The spark doesn't catch fire immediately. Fortunately, a thin wisp of white smoke rises. You quickly lean down, get close to it, and blow gently but continuously with all the strength you have left in your lungs. This action requires skill. Blow too hard, and you'll extinguish the spark. Blow too softly, and it will die from lack of oxygen. Your cheeks burn from the smoke. Your eyes start to water, but you can't stop. Finally, after a few moments of continuous blowing, a faint red flame trembles and hesitates in that wisp of smoke, then suddenly bursts into a stubborn burn. You carefully carry this precious flame to the kindling inside the oven. The dry wood catches fire quickly, crackling and popping. The flame growing from small to large, changing from a faint orange to a bright golden yellow, greedily licking the woodpile you built. Light bursts forth from the oven mouth, illuminating the entire room in an instant, stretching your shadow long against the opposite wall, soon like a giant wrestling with a beast. The oven, that sleeping beast, has finally woken up. Its heartbeat is the crackle of the flame. Now you can't leave it. For the next few hours, you'll stay here, adding firewood constantly, controlling the flame. Your goal is to let the flame heat every corner of the oven evenly, storing heat in the thick brick walls and oven floor. Bakers lit a fire inside the oven first, heating the bricks to an extremely high temperature, then removed all the fire and ash, relying on the radiant heat emitted by the bricks to bake the bread. It works completely differently from the ovens we use today with continuous heat sources. Your job now is like charging a huge heat battery. You judge the temperature by observing the color of the flame when it changes from red to orange, then to bright yellow, and finally to a dazzling white hot. You know the temperature is just right. This process relies entirely on experienced thermometer, only your eyes and skin as tools. Sometimes, if your steel and flint happen to be missing or damp, there's a stranger but more troublesome way to start a fire. Knock on your neighbor's door and ask to borrow fire. In an era without matches, keeping the fire at home from going out was extremely important. If a family's fire went out, they would send a child with a clay pot filled with ash to go door to door, begging neighbors for a piece of burning charcoal. This act of borrowing fire was an important form of community mutual aid back then. The flame dances merrily in the oven, waves of heat rushing toward you, warming your cold cheeks and hands. You feel like an alchemist performing a great transformation, turning cold wood into heat energy that can give life to bread. You watch the color of the oven walls. They change from their original gray-black to gradually being baked by the flame, turning white. When the entire inner wall of the oven becomes white hot, as white as snow, you know this heat battery is almost fully charged. This process takes 2 to 3 hours. During this time, you can't doze off soon. You have to stay alert at all times. You sit on a small wooden stool, leaning against a wall, feeling the increasingly intense warmth emanating from the oven. This warmth chases away the midnight chill and the loneliness in your heart. You're not alone. You have the flame for company, the waking oven for company. In the distance, the monastery's first morning prayer bell rings effervescent and serene, piercing the dark night, announcing that a new day has quietly begun while most people are still sound asleep. And your work is about to enter the next stage. When the oven's brick walls are burning white hot, waves of heat so intense you can barely get close, you know the time has come. You pick up that long-handled iron scraper and a mop wrapped in a damp cloth, preparing to clean the oven chamber next. You have to remove all the burning wood and red hot ash from the oven, sooty and dangerous and skillful task. You use the scraper to quickly and accurately scoop the burning charcoal toward the oven mouth, and they fall into an iron bucket you placed on the floor in advance, making a series of clinking sounds, sparks flying everywhere. You have to move fast feet every second. The oven door is open, precious heat is lost. After scooping out most of the charcoal, a thin layer of scalding ash remains on the oven floor. That's when you use the damp mop You reach it deep into the oven, wiping the oven floor quickly. The wet cloth touches the red-hot brick, immediately letting out a loud hissing sound, and a cloud of white steam bursts forth from the oven mouth, hitting you in the face with the smell of hot ash. You cough violently, but your hands can't stop. You have to clean the oven floor spotlessly. Not a single speck of ash lefted otherwise. It will stick to the bottom of the bread, ruining the taste and appearance. You repeat this process several times until the oven floor is as clean as new. You quickly close the heavy iron oven door, trapping all the heat you just stored inside. Now the oven enters a soaking period. 40, the temperature inside will gradually even out, preparing for the first batch of dough. While you were wrestling with the oven, the bowl of yeast you placed on the shelf has fully woken up. You walk over, lift the linen cloth, and a richer, more lively sour aroma hits your nose this stronger than before. The batter in the bowl is no longer lifeless. Its volume has expanded a little, covered with dense small bubbles on the surface. You stir it gently with a spoon, feeling the airiness inside, the vitality. It's alive. Now you'll use this activated starter to make a larger vat of dough. You walk to a huge wooden kneading trough, also called a dough trough in some places. One of your most important tools. It's usually carved from a single large piece of wood or joined together with thicker planks, like a huge lidless box, exactly waist high. First, you pour in the prepared flour, shun the place where a baker's professionalism shines. You don't just use one type of flour in your shop. You have several kinds ready. The bag on the far side contains the whitest, finest flour when pain de mule flour, also called Lord's bread flour. This flour is sifted multiple times, removing all bran and impurities, and is extremely expensive. The bread made from it is called manchetti soft in texture, white in color, exclusive to nobles and wealthy merchants. The large bag in the middle contains your most commonly used flour, sifted only once or twice, yellowish in color, with some small bran particles. The bread baked from it is called common white bread 50, the staple food of townsfolk and wealthy peasants. And the roughest bag in the corner contains unsifted whole wheat flour, even mixed with some rye or barley flour. The bread made from this flour is called muslin, or traveler's bread, dark in color, rough and dense in texture, but very filling, the food of laborers and the poor. In the Middle Ages, the color and texture of bread were the most intuitive symbols of social class. The kind of bread you ate told others exactly what kind of person you were. A peasant caught stealing a noble's white bread might even be punished. As a baker, you must clearly know which class your customers belong to and provide them with the corresponding bread. Today, the first thing you'll make is the most popular common white bread. You scoop several large spoonfuls of flour into one end of the kneading trough, piling it up like a small white mountain. You dig a hole at the top, like a volcano crater, then pour the fully awakened starter into the crater. Next, you add water and salt. Salt was also a precious commodity back then. Controlling the amount of salt, that was not only for seasoning, but also for controlling the yeast's fermentation speed. How much salt to add, how much water, whether the water was cold or warm sievin. There were no fixed recipes. Everything depended on your experience and intuition as a baker. You needed to feel the dryness and wetness of the flour with your hands, smell the temperature and humidity of the air, then form a unique recipe in your mind. You roll up your sleeves to your elbows. Take a deep breath, preparing to start the hardest work of the day. But before that, you notice some hard, dried dough crumbs left in the corner of the kneading trough. You scrape them off with your nails and put them into a special small jar. These dried, fermented dough crumbs were actually a primitive cleaning agent. In an era without chemical cleaners, people discovered that a piece of wet, fermented raw dough could effectively wipe dirt and soot off walls, tapestries, even some oil paintings. The stickiness of the dough could pick up dust, and the slight acidity produced by the yeast could break down some oil stains. So collecting these dough crumbs was not only to keep the kneading trough clean, but also to save up for a big cleaning at home. With all the ingredients ready, you plunge your hands into that cold, wet mixture flour, water, salt, yeast. These seemingly unrelated things are about to merge into an organic whole in your hands. You lean forward slightly, shifting your weight onto your arms. Such a long, arduous battle is about to begin. You start kneading the dough. This is nothing like the relaxed, pleasant experience of kneading a small dough in a modern home kitchen. You're facing a huge dough weighing dozens, even hundreds of pounds. A small mountain of it fills your kneading trough, and your task is to conquer this mountain with your own physical strength. Your arms sink deep into the dough, feeling its initial coldness, wetness, stickiness, and roughness. Your fingers feel the grains of flour, the flow of water, the slide of the yeast under your touch. You push hard forward with the heels of your palms, the dough deforming under you thought of it. Part of it pushed away, part of it stubbornly sticking to the bottom of the trough. You fold it over, press it down with your knuckles, then push and fold again. It's a repetitive, mechanical, extremely tiring action. Your entire upper body, from your shoulders to your abdomen, works in unison. Soon, sweat beads start to form on your forehead. Your breathing becomes heavy, every exhale condensing into a cloud of white mist in the cold air. In the workshop, the only sounds are your heavy breathing and the thud of the dough being slammed into the wooden trough. This is more than just physical labor. Physical labor. It's an art, a science. As you knead, you're actually doing something extremely important. Developing the gluten, the proteins in the flour, with the help of water, gradually connect and stretch under your kneading, forming a complex, elastic network. This network is the skeleton of the bread fitty traps, the gas produced by the yeast during fermentation, allowing the bread to rise and become fluffy. If the gluten isn't fully developed, the baked bread will be as hard as a brick. If you knead too much, the gluten network will break. The dough will become sticky and unshapeable. You need to find that perfect balance, and the only way to judge is by touch. You knead for about a quarter of an hour, and the dough starts to undergo a wonderful transformation. It's no longer as sticky, no longer clinging easily to your hands and the trough walls. It becomes smoother and more elastic. You press it gently with your finger through. The dough springs back slowly. You pinch off a small piece and stretch it gently. Forms a thin, translucent film without breaking, like a piece of window paper. This is the famous window pane test. When you can pull such a film, you know the gluten is fully developed. Of course, in the Middle Ages you had no idea what gluten or protein networks were. To you, this felt more like magic through your labor and sweat. You turned a pile of lifeless powder into a smooth, soft, lively creature full of strength. It was like having a conversation with the dough, a wrestling match. You shaped it with your strength, and it responded to you with its softness and elasticity. When the dough is fully kneaded, you lift it gently with both hands, fully heavy yet light, firm yet supplely. Place it back in the kneading trough. Next comes the first proofing, another crucial step that requires patience. You cover the kneading trough with a clean linen cloth, thick enough to keep the dough warm and shield it from any cold drafts. The proofing area is also carefully chosen right next to the oven, where the residual heat can wrap around the dough like a gentle blanket. You can't place it too close, or the heat will kill the yeast too far, and the dough will proof too slowly, making you miss the best time to bake. Again, it's all about balance, about that unspoken understanding between you and the dough. You step back, wiping the sweat from your forehead with the back of your sleeve. The coarse wool scratches your skin slightly, but you barely notice. Your arms are sore. Your shoulders feel heavy as if they're carrying a pile of firewood, and your lower back aches from leaning forward for so long. This is the price of being a baker for calloused hands, sore muscles, and days that start long before the sun rises. But when you look at that covered kneading trough, you feel a quiet sense of satisfaction welling up in your chest. You know that under that linen cloth, something magical is happening. The yeast is working tirelessly, eating the sugars in the flour, producing gas, and making the dough grow bigger and softer, one tiny bubble at a time. Proofing takes time, soften about an hour, sometimes longer, depending on the temperature of the air and the vitality of the yeast. You don't have a clock to check. You judge by the light coming through the window and the feel of the air on your skin. As you wait, you take a moment to rest, not a long rest, just enough to catch your breath. You walk back to the small wooden stool by the oven, sitting down slowly, your tired legs sighing with relief. The oven is still warm, waves of heat gently caressing your face and hands, chasing away the last traces of cold and fatigue. Outside the window, The sky is no longer pitch black. Sky needs turning a faint, pale blue, like the color of washed linen. The first hints of dawn are breaking, and the town is starting to stir. You hear a rooster crowing in the distance, loud and clear, echoing through the quiet streets. A dog barks somewhere nearby, then falls silent. You even hear the softer creak of a neighbor's door hinge. Another early riser starting their day sooty, maybe a blacksmith heading to his forge, or a farmer going to check on his animals. In this town, everyone's day starts early, each with their own labor, each with their own small joys and tiredness. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds of the waking town and the faint hum of the yeast working in the dough. It's a peaceful sound, a sound of life, a sound that has repeated itself day after day, century after century, in bakeries just like this one. After a while, you stand up slowly, your muscles stiff but refreshed. It's time to check on the dough. You walk back to the kneading trough, lifting the linen cloth gently, as if uncovering a secret. A wave of warm, sour, sweet aroma hits your nose, sighs stronger and more lively than before. The dough has doubled in size, puffy and soft, its surface dotted with small, airy bubbles. You press it gently with your finger, then the indentation stays for a moment, then slowly springs back, leaving a faint fingerprint. Perfect. The first proofing is done. Now you need to punch down the dough. This step is simple but important. 20IT releases the excess gas trapped inside the dough, redistributes the yeast evenly, and ensures that the bread will have a fine, even crumb. After baking, you plunge your fist into the center of the dough, feeling it deflate under your hand with a soft whoosh sound. It's a satisfying feeling, firm yet yielding, like pressing into a cloud that's just dense enough. You then fold the edges of the dough toward the center, pressing down gently to seal them, before turning the dough over in the trough. You cover it with the linen cloth again for a short second proofing phenol, as long as the first, just enough to let the dough relax and rise a little more, making it easier to shape. While you wait for the second proofing, you take the time to prepare the tools you'll need next. A wooden peel sushi, a long flat board with a handle used to slide the dough into and out of the hot oven through, and a small knife with a sharp blade for scoring the top of the dough. You wipe the peel with a clean, dry cloth, making sure there's no dust or flour on it. 40 otherwise, the dough might stick when you slide it into the oven. You also check the oven temperature again, placing your hand near the oven door and feeling the heat. It's still hot, 20, not as blistering as when you first cleaned it, but just right for baking bread. The bricks have retained their heat evenly, creating a perfect baking environment. You nod to yourself. All your hard work so far has paid off. The second proofing doesn't take long, fortunately about a quarter of an hour. When you lift the linen cloth again, the dough has risen slightly, soft and puffy, ready to be shaped. You flour your hands lightly with a handful of whole wheat flour, and not too much. or it will dry out the dough before lifting the dough out of the trough. It's light and airy now, easier to handle than before. You place it on a floured wooden board beside the trough, then divide it into smaller portions with the sharp knife. The size of each portion depends on what kind of bread you're making. So small loaves for families, larger ones for inns and taverns, and tiny rolls for children or for those who can't afford a whole loaf. Today, you're making mostly medium-sized loaves of common white bread thiven, the most popular choice among your customers. You cut the dough carefully, making sure each portion is roughly the same size. Some are too big and some too small. They'll bake unevenly, some burning on the outside, while others stay raw on the inside. Once divided, you start shaping each portion into loaves. Shaping bread is another skill that takes years to master. Not too tight, or the dough won't rise properly during baking. Not too loose, or the loaf will collapse in the oven. You take a portion of dough in your hands, cupping it gently, and rotate it in a circular motion on the floured board, using the palms of your hands to pull the edges toward the bottom. Each rotation tightens the surface of the dough slightly, creating a smooth, taut skin that will hold the shape during baking. You press the bottom gently to seal the edges. Then place the shaped loaf on the floured peel. You repeat this process with each portion of dough formed slowly, carefully, without rushing. This is another quiet, ritualistic part of your day. Turning shapeless lumps of dough into neat, uniform loaves, each one a promise of warmth and sustenance. You turn around, and then stands your wife, wrapped in a thick shawl, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "You're up early," you say softly, your voice rough from the early morning cold and heavy breathing. She smiles sleepily, walking over to you and placing a warm hand on your arm. "Here," touch chasing away the last of the soreness. "I heard you moving around," she says, her voice gentle, like the dawn light outside. "I thought I'd come help. The children are still asleep, but they'll wake soon, hungry." You nod, a warm feeling spreading through your chest, warmer than the oven's heat, warmer than the dawn sun. This is why you do this, not just for the bread, not just for the work, but for this suna. The quiet companionship, the warm touch of your wife's hand, the thought of your children waking up to the smell of fresh bread. She picks up a handful of flour, flouring her own hands, and starts helping you shape the last few loaves. Her movements slower than yours, but just as steady, just as careful. Together, you work in silence, the only sounds being the soft rustle of flour, the gentle thud of dough on the board, and the distant crow of another rooster. Outside the window, the sky is now a soft golden blue, and the sun is starting to peek over the rooftops of the town, casting warm, golden light through the window and onto the wooden board where you shape the bread. The light catches the dust motes floating in the air, turning them into tiny, glowing sparks. Sin-like magic. Right there in your small bakery. When all the loaves are shaped, you let them rest for a few minutes on the peel sundae, a final, short proofing called Bench rest. Stew to let the gluten relax after shaping. This ensures that the loaves won't deflate when you slide them into the oven. While they rest, you take the sharp knife and make a few shallow slashes on the top of each loaf. These slashes aren't just for decoration thuin. They allow the dough to expand evenly during baking, preventing the loaves from bursting open at the sides. You make the slashes quickly and confidently so not too deep, not too shallow, each one at a slight angle. This is another trick you learned from your master, passed down from baker to baker through the generations. With the slashing done, the loaves are ready to go into the oven. Your wife steps back, wiping her hands on her apron, and watches you with a soft smile. You take a deep breath, grasping the handle of the peel firmly. The oven door is heavy, but you open it quickly and smoothly, a wave of intense heat rushing out to greet you, hot enough to make your face flush, hot enough to dry the sweat on your forehead instantly. You lean forward slightly, carefully sliding the first few loaves off the peel and onto the clean, hot oven floor. The moment the dough touches the brick, it lets out a soft, sizzling sound, and a cloud of steam rises up, mixing with the warm, yeasty aroma of the dough. It's a beautiful sound, a sound that tells you everything is right. You slide more loaves into the oven, one by one, making sure they're spaced, evenly full of room for them to expand during baking, but not so much that they waste the precious heat. When the last loaf is in, you close the heavy iron oven door with a loud clang, trapping all the heat and aroma inside. Now you wait thorfin, the longest wait of the day, but also the sweetest. You and your wife stand side by the oven, feeling its warmth on your faces, listening to the soft sounds coming from inside Thufi, the gentle sizzle of the dough, the faint crackle of the residual heat in the bricks. Outside, the town is fully awake now. You hear the clatter of a cart on the cobblestone streets, the chatter of neighbors greeting each other, the laughter of a child running by. The bakery's door is still closed, but soon enough, your customers will start to arrive. Sufin, the blacksmith, the tailor, the farmer's wife, all coming for a loaf of fresh, warm bread to start their day. You glance at your wife, and she smiles at you, her eyes shining in the golden light of the morning sun. "It smells good," she says softly. You nod, taking her hand in your your hands calloused and flour dusted, hers soft but strong. "Yes," you say, your voice filled with quiet pride. "It smells like home," and it does. 40. The warm, yeasty aroma of baking bread, the heat of the oven, the soft companionship of your wife, the sounds of the waking town outside. This is home soon, not just the four walls of the bakery, not just the kneading trough and the oven, but the labor, the warmth, the love wrapped up in every loaf of bread you bake. You lean against the wall beside the oven, your wife beside you, and you wait. You wait for the bread to rise and brown. Wait for the moment when you'll open the oven door and be greeted by a pile of golden, fluffy loaves, Wait for the first customer to knock on your door. Wait for your children to wake up and run into the workshop, begging for a warm piece of bread straight from the oven. It's a simple life, a hard life, but it's yours warm, full, and sweet, just like the bread you bake every day. And as you wait, the sun rises higher in the sky, casting its warm light over the town, over your bakery, over you and your wife, and over the oven that holds the promise of a new day. It's quiet, it's peaceful, it's perfect to be an ordinary day in the life of a medieval baker, full of labor and love, full of warmth and hope. A day that feels like a gentle hug, slow and steady, just like the rhythm of your heart, just like the rhythm of the bread rising, just like the rhythm of a day well lived.